Welcome to the Zoë Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learned from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoë Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, and we have a solo-sode today. It's been ages since it was just you and me chatting, so settle in. This will be a bit of fun. I wanted to reflect on some of the big insights from this past quarter in our theme of leading change, specifically vertical development, because we had an enormous amount of guests this last quarter. We had 13 guests, and it's been tremendous. There's been some amazing stuff happening here. Before I review some of the key takeaways that you can bite your teeth into, you might also want to bite your teeth and your earballs into our monthly newsletter. This is when I write an in-depth article on a topic that's relevant to the theme for the quarter and give you a little bit more detail and questions and frameworks for you to really play with the topic a little bit more deeply. So you can get on board there. Just go to my website, zoerouth.com, and sign up for the newsletter. And once a month, you get my lovely monthly newsletter. Now, let's get on to a little bit of review. It's quite interesting, when I was looking at the themes from the different interviewees. I think the first theme when we're talking about vertical development is challenging our perspective, because perspective is power. When we see more, we lead better. And vertical development is all about increasing our ability to see more, to handle more complexity. How do we do that? We do that by challenging our thinking, our being, our doing. And there was 4 main interviewees, I thought, that really challenged ideas and challenged my thinking in particular, and maybe they did yours too. The first one was Carol Sanford. What a laugh this woman was. She's quite extraordinary. She's 80, full of vim and vigor, and quite a tour de force, an accomplished award-winning author. And that conversation left me going, what's all this about? One of her key messages that stayed with me is to ditch feedback, which is, as someone who teaches how to give effective feedback, this was challenging for me to wrestle with. And her paradigm is more about, instead of telling people what they're doing wrong, is why don't you create the conversation that asks them where they want to be, how do they want to elevate, how do they want to be superstars, and helping them solve their own challenges in order to get to that vision of who they are. It's beautiful. And her whole idea of regenerative leadership is a pretty powerful one, and I'm still mulling it over and basking in the concepts with her books. So that was Carol. That was the first challenging idea. The next one is Brian Emerson, who's the co-author of Navigating Polarities. And polarities, I love the idea of polarities. It is a really important leadership framework that we need to be across, especially when we're dealing with complexity. And using polarities is a way of but managing intractable problems, like the constant tension between now and next. How do we deal with the urgent and important while also planning for the future? It's a perennial challenge for leaders, or the perennial challenge of leaders and managers, which is team versus task. We need to get the work done. We need to make sure the dynamics are good. So those are both polarities. And the interview with Brian was really helpful in discussing that, some of the subtleties around what is a polarity, what is not, and how sometimes it's important to keep either or thinking and not just throw it out. So that was a pretty good interview, I think, and I like those concepts. Then we had Jeff Kosnick, and he was the author of Untapped Talent, which looked at hiring felons, basically, after they get released from prison into your business. And this is a big deal in the US. And all the possibilities that brings, like the humanitarian aspect of offering people a second chance, is quite amazing. And the potential to make long-lasting generational change by that at that critical juncture of getting people to be competent and able to hold down a job is awesome. So I highly recommend that. It was quite a powerful book, his book Untapped Talent, and I loved the interview with him too. And then the last interview from last week, which was which was just awesome, was with Buster Benson, who is the author of Why Are We Yelling? How to Have Productive Disagreements. And the whole concept of productive disagreements is really substantive and challenging and useful for all of us. I think it's too easy just to be dismissive of people who have different ideas to us, and we think they're crackpots. Just today, we got a letter in our mailbox, of all things, people sending us a written letter. It was a Dear Householder letter, and it was from a Christian group of some sort. They didn't actually list which church or group they were from, explaining the challenges of the pandemic through a Christian lens and inviting us to find out more. And we're not Christians, and I've never been a practicing Christian or gone to church or anything like that. And I found it quite interesting. The response we could have to that, very easy to say, schmarmy salespeople trying to pitch us crazy solutions to scientific issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to think about things. And I found myself reacting less to this than I might have done just 6 months ago, because I generally don't like it when people try and impose their beliefs on me. And here it was an invitation to see things through a different lens. And I put that down to becoming more curious through Buster Benson's interview and his work, which I think is fabulous. And he's just a generally fabulous human being with a big heart. So I really enjoyed that interview. So those were the 4 big challenging interviews and challenging ideas pieces that came from this last quarter. Then there were the inspiring leaders. And we had Tim Jackson, classic entrepreneur, the pull him up by the bootstraps and go run hard and build fast and be versatile Tim Jackson of Access 4. He was quite a fun person to interview, and I admire what he's doing with his crew over there at Access 4. There's Paul Hargreaves from the UK, and who established his business as a B Corp, and being a very purpose-driven enterprise has been really a fundamental shift for him, and I found his story quite compelling. And then there was the gorgeous Susie Walford, who from EML, and her heart-centered approach to leadership, and her key premise that she just wants everybody to go to work and have a good day every day. And I think there's a lot to learn from each of these inspiring leaders in different avenues and different approaches. Oh, and then there were the leadership extremes. There was three interviewees which were just extreme in one way or another. There was Peter Scott, who is the retired Australian Commodore from the Australian Navy, who led submarines for ages, and he was quite an interesting human to learn about leading in such extreme environments where you're incommunicado and going stealth for months on end. You don't get to talk to your family. You have virtually no privacy. You're in a tube underwater, no fresh air, all that kind of stuff. So that was quite a fascinating interview with some awesome leadership insights. And Bobby Laporte, the Ironman woman who kicked off her Ironman career after the age of 50, and she just has this whole approach to leaning into trying new things, which I think is remarkable. And Jeff Nischwitz, whose book Walking Backwards on the Camino, and his whole experience of actually walking backwards on the Camino was quite entertaining and unusual, and it's got me thinking, like, who would ever think to walk backwards downhill on a mountain? I would never have thought that. But it was how he managed his pain, and he started to see the world differently as a result of that. I'm a big believer in bushwalking, and big views give big insights. So, yeah, the hat tip to Jeff and his escapades on the Camino. And then the last set of interviewees I think were quite useful, from developing insights around self-care and self-awareness. Mark Butler, his episode was incredibly popular about how to look after mental health in the workplace for you and your people. Very timely, as people have been struggling a lot, I know, through a lot of the lockdowns here in Australia and around the world. So he had some awesome tips on how to look differently at mental health and to change our perspective on that. Then we had Mike Normand, who's got his program, Coach Yourself Up, and using particular frameworks to help change your own perspective is a really handy dandy, that's not quite the right expression, life skill, life tool to help us deal with different situations and to be able to problem solve it for ourselves. And lastly, we had the lovely Kate Billing, who is a human-centered leadership expert, and her story about how she made massive perspective shifts on deep reflection exercises and processes was quite fabulous as well. So that was like a whirlwind tour of the guests we've had on the show this last quarter, and the awesome insights that we've had along the way. I wanted to add my insights and my sort of percolations on this whole idea of leading change, particularly vertical development and shifting and expanding perspective. In Amplifiers, we took three-pronged approach to exploring this topic. Amplifiers is my implementation community for CEOs, general managers, and managing directors from across different sectors. It's where we come together in person in Canberra and also virtually once a quarter for a deep dive on the theme of the quarter, as well as webcasts in between. And what we looked at this quarter under this topic was, first of all, the whole idea of vertical development, that we can change how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and how we see each other to allow us to be more nimble and flexible to deal with volatility, uncertainty, and complexity. And the idea of leadership maturity, that we can become more mature and able and flexible in our thinking and being and doing as we respond to our context as well as explore it. So the whole idea of leadership maturity is useful because not everybody's at the same stage of leadership maturity in our businesses and our organizations and teams. And how we communicate and interact with people has got to be flexible to where they are up to. And that's really helpful to help wash out conflict and to be more patient with humans, and also to know where we can assist them to grow as well. Two other exercises that we did was, the first one was called the 3-2-1 process. And this I first learned about in Ken Wilber et al. It's co-written by a few authors, Integral Life Practice, which is a pretty heavy-duty book in terms of its scope and its exercises, and it's all about developing your leadership maturity and deeper self-awareness. And so I highly recommend that. It's called Integral Life Practice. The 3-2-1 process is about exploring shadow. And the general idea is, if you find yourself being irritated or provoked or uneasy about something, you can do a reflection exercise. With the 3 is talking about it in third person. So this is what happened, and this is the experience that was. So, and then you have a conversation in second person, where you have a conversation with the other person in your head or in your journal about what was going on there. So you imagine a conversation where you tease out the issues. And then the 1 piece is where you sort of adopt the perspective of the other person, or adopt the message from what came out in the 3 and the 2 part, and you become that part of you that you are resisting and tucking away and wanting to avoid. Very fabulous exercise. So that was a little bit of understanding our own barnacles and how to slough them off the hull of our personal boat. Wow, I actually pulled off that metaphor without stumbling. Amazing. And the second exercise is all of Buster Benson's work, which is about being curious and asking open questions and being open to having your mind changed and extended in conversation with somebody else who's got a very different perspective. My reflection through all of this is that I think identity has got a big piece to do with how we react to others and how we put our beliefs on the table in opposition to others, especially in polarized conversations. Here's how I sort of looked at it through one of the contentious issues that we've got right now, which is around vaccination. And I'll talk about my perspective first, and then I'll talk about the perspective of somebody who's got a different opinion and how they cross over and where they divide. So I start with beliefs, and on the vaccination debate, my personal belief is that vaccination is a sensible and pro-social thing to do. So that's the belief, and the polar opposite of that, or the polarized opposite of that, is that vaccinations should not be mandated. That's just one perspective. There's lots of other alternative perspectives, so I'm playing with those two. So for me, vaccination is sensible and pro-social. For someone who believes differently, it could be that vaccinations should not be mandated. Now, underneath that belief is an identity. And this is where I think it gets interesting. So I thought about, like, if that's my belief, what's the identity that's important to me that's associated with that belief or creates that belief? And when I'm looking at myself, it's like, well, my identity that I am attached to is that I am community-minded, I am intelligent, and I am science-based, and I'm an intellectual. So that's an identity that forms my belief of vaccination is sensible and pro-social. And there's a cluster of other beliefs that go along with that. When I looked at somebody who had a different belief that vaccination should not be mandated, and I asked myself, what is the identity that they hold? And I discovered one of them is that they see themselves as independent, free thinker. And it's like, I have no problem with somebody being an independent, free thinker. And I doubt they would have any problem with me having an identity that's someone who's community-minded, intelligent, science-based, etc. So as soon as I started to identify someone's identity that drove that belief, it became more obvious to me about why that belief is important to them. Because the identity of an independent, free thinker, just like my identities, is something that they would hold dear to themselves. Now, underneath identity are specific values. And when I thought about the values that related to this identity and this belief, for me, my values were safety, feeling safe, and also freedom. So once we're safe, we will have freedoms. When I looked at the polarized opposite of somebody who believes that vaccines should not be mandated, the values underneath their identity of an independent free thinker were freedom and safety. And I thought, whoa, hang on a minute. So my values were safety and freedom, and theirs were freedom and safety. Different order. And I think that speaks a little bit to the identity creation that comes as a result of that. So for me, safety was prioritized above freedom. For them, freedom was prioritized above safety. And that's sort of like at the crux of where the conflict comes in. It's not necessarily about the beliefs, it's more there. We both have the same values, we just order them differently. And we construct identity and meaning and beliefs on top of that. It's very, very powerful reflection. Underneath the values, though, are needs. And when I looked at my values of safety and freedom, the need that I have is to feel safe. And certainly when I reflect on all the conversations I've had about coronavirus and vaccinations, it's all about this need to feel safe. So then I looked at what are the needs that are underpinning the polarized picture. And you know what? Their values were to feel safe as well. And so when I looked at somebody's belief that vaccination should not be mandated, they feel that they're an independent free thinker, they value freedom and safety, and they want to feel safe. They see government mandates as a threat to freedom, and they don't feel safe with that. And I was like, wow, that's where that's coming from. Whereas for me, the government mandates is the government's looking after me. And I think there's a cluster of other beliefs around what is the role of the government, how much can we trust government. That's also at play in this conversation. Well, that was my reflection on polarized conversations and shifting perspective. And by doing that, I started to humanize more the people who had different opinions to me. And I think that's one of the key... Sorry, I'm shuffling my papers here. I took a bunch of notes before recording this. That's one of the key principles that Buster talks about, is not to dehumanize the people around us, is to see them as another human being. And as I did this exercise of looking at beliefs, identity, values, and needs, sort of as a iceberg, I guess, so with the beliefs on top and everything else underpinning it, I really started to see more humans, more humanity in humans. And I think this is the key takeaway for me in all this conversation about growing, expanding perspective, is that we're all humans doing our best and wanting to have a good life. And that gave me a lot more patience and compassion for somebody who, at first blush, has a differing opinion that I find difficult. And I think if we did that a little bit more, then we would have less abrasion and less conflict and more curiosity. And so my suggestion to you is to get curious. Be really super curious about what's going on for somebody who's got a different point of view to you. You don't have to prove them wrong. You don't have to prove yourself right. Just get curious, What's their identity? What are their values? What are their needs in there? Where are the similarities and common ground with your point of view? Well, that's the summary for this quarter's fabulous set of interviews that we had in the podcast. This next quarter, here in Australia, it's the summer quarter. The theme is leading performance, specifically high-performing teams. So this is all about productivity and delivery and getting results. And we've got some great authors and great leaders coming up on the show. And through it, I'm hoping that you'll be able to produce better results faster with your team. That's absolutely what we're focused on in Amplifiers. We have in Amplifiers, it's actually our live immersion this week. So the virtual group is meeting Thursday, and the Canberra group, we're meeting in person, yay, on Friday, which is super exciting to see humans again now that our lockdown is lifting quite a lot here in Canberra. If you're interested in joining a community of big thinkers with big hearts who want to make a big difference, then that's Amplifiers. We go about brass tacks of how to build our leadership ability. We run experiments each quarter. We dig into these tough leadership thinking issues, and we work towards being better leaders for ourselves, for our teams, for our communities, for our families. And if you'd like to do that in the company of like-minded peeps who are really awesome and humble and curious, then check it out. Just go to my website, zoerouth.com, ZOEROUTH.com. Click on programs. You'll find Amplifiers right there. Have a surf around. And if you want to have a chat, reach out and we can have a chat. See if it's right for you. Definitely you want to start next year with a really big kick of energy because the world has shifted yet again and we want to take advantage of that. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoë Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoë Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoë, go to zoerouth.com.